Up, Hanna Garth, who is an assistant professor of anthropology at Princeton University. As a sociocultural and medical anthropologist, her research is focused on food access and the global food system. She studies these questions in Latin America and the Caribbean and among Black and Latinx communities in the United States. She published the book Food in Cuba, The Pursuit of a Decent Meal, and co-edited the volume Black Food Matters, Food Justice in the Wake of Racial Justice. We are also very privileged to have Bonnetta Adeeb, founder and president of STEAM Onward, Inc., a nonprofit 501c3 organization in Southern Maryland, as well as the projects Ujuma Cooperative Farming Alliance and Ujuma Seeds. The A in STEAM refers to agriculture. In addition, she works with the Cooperative Gardens Commission to distribute free heirloom seeds to communities in need, serving 300 seed hubs nationally. Ms. Adeeb, a retired teacher, was an educator for 37 years. She taught social studies and career research and work-based learning, a school-to-work educational program. So thank you again both for joining us, and we're excited to turn it over to you and to hear your talk.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for having us. We're really excited to talk about this project, which we are very passionate about. So we're really excited that a group of people cares about it and wants to hear about it. So I will start us off with about 10 to 15 minutes of like orienting the project, and then I'll turn things over to Bonnetta. The Heirloom Gardens Oral History Project is started as a collaboration between Princeton University, Spelman College, and Ujama. It's not, oh, there, let me click. So our goal is to collect oral histories of people who've worked to preserve Black and Indigenous seed and foodways in the southeastern United States and Appalachia. So that means people, regardless of their personal identities, who care about the preservation of the kinds of plants and foods that Black and Indigenous people see as culturally meaningful. And we were able to undertake this project by using student oral historians who we trained in oral history, which I'll talk about in a little bit, and bringing them to the communities to interview farmers, gardeners, chefs, community organizers, local historians, elders, and young people who are actively working in these fields. This is a trailer for our oral history archive that I'm not going to show, but it's up on our website, so people can reference it. So part of oral history ethics is that you have to really collectively create the project that you're creating and come to a series of understandings with the group of people that you determine are the most important stakeholders or the most relevant stakeholders to what you're doing. So we started out this project having kind of like a series of Zoom meetings with the folks on this page and the folks on this page to come to an understanding and an agreement about what we were trying to do, why we were trying to do it, who we wanted to talk to, but also like who should hold the archive, who should be able to process the interviews, who's sort of entrusted to be the stewards of this community knowledge. And the start of this project really came out of something that maybe Bonnetta can talk about a little bit later, but we've started calling it the grandmother's story circles, where people were starting to realize that they needed to remember the things that their grandmothers were growing as a way to sort of not forget the memories of food culture that are held across generations. But often when you lose contact with farming communities and you lose touch with gardening, you might also lose the stories of what's connected to the foods that your ancestors are eating. So to do this project, we also made sure that we were really attuned to and following the Oral History Association's principles and best practices. So part of that means that the narrators are in charge of and have the rights to their stories. So we utilize their names, and they know we utilize their names. We share the story as they tell it, whether we don't sort of like fact check their story. We essentially believe and carry forward the stories that they are sharing in their narratives as part of oral history, ethics and best practices. We also agreed upon where the archive would be housed. So we decided in talking in community that it would be best to house it at Atlanta University Center, their Woodruff Library system. So it's housed at an HBCU, an institution that the community feels is somewhat more trustworthy than an institution like Princeton. um, so I'm happy we all kind of came to a consensus around that. And this is just this is a picture of one of the meetings where we came to kind of a consensus around a different thing, which is what kinds of questions would end up going in the question guide. So this is tricky to like work with a broad community of people who have really different things that they care about, really different kind of detailed specificity that they want, but also needing to carefully balance like how you open up an interview and get people to start talking about things that are deeply personal to them. So we came up with trying to slowly ease into things by asking people to introduce themselves, tell us where they're from, what are the places you call home, give us some memories of what growing up was like, what did your family cook? And then we get into more specific questions, asking people about the specific plant varieties they were growing, the specific foods they were eating, how people were engaging in practices of seed saving, whether people were sharing and trading seeds and plants with other community members. And there's a number of different elements that we're interested in kind of tracing through this work. Like, for instance, how have certain culturally meaningful seeds moved, or culturally meaningful foods moved with people as they've migrated to different parts of the United States. We piloted our research questions and our methods at Jim Embry's birthday party. um, and it was an interesting group of folks he brought together who are all people who are involved in some way in the farming community. And so we kind of tested out our interview guide on them and worked out some of the tweaks and difficulties that we found there. This is just another photo from that event. And then once we had kind of piloted and tested things, we moved into training our students. So this is the first set of students that we worked with. Some of whom, the students from Spelman, actually had quite a lot of experience in collecting oral histories because they'd all worked on Spelman's own oral history project, looking at like the Black women who are historically part of Spelman's community. So they were really skilled at the work of kind of interviewing in a way that makes the narrator feel at ease and gets them to share their story. And our Princeton University students needed a little bit more guidance on how to finesse that. But one of the key elements that we needed to work with the students was working on building trust with communities that have long-standing distrust of institutions of higher education and of outsiders coming into their community and taking things and knowledge, and making sure that we're not doing anything that would make the narrators feel uncomfortable, and we're not at all kind of overstepping the ethical bounds that we've established. But the students pulled through. They did very well. This is also just a shot of us at the Spelman Garden. So our first summer, this is me training them in the audio equipment. But our first summer, we were able to collect 45 interviews. And the sites we did in that summer were the greater Atlanta area and the greater Washington, D.C. area. And then in the second summer, we worked in the greater Asheville area, again in Atlanta and southern Georgia and Alabama. And what was the other? I'm missing the third site. North Carolina. Wait, no, that was Asheville. There was another site that I'm blanking on right now. So we send the students out to different sites where we have partners that are organizations that work with Ujamaa on various projects. And they're kind of the mentors and stewards who help bring the students into these communities and introduce them to the people that could potentially participate in the project. And we're working on processing the interviews and doing some basic analysis. I'll say a couple more things before turning it over to Bonnetta, but we've found that the number one most talked about crop is collards by far. So collards have a very um, clear and prominent presence at the dinner table, but also as something that was very commonly cultivated across generations in these communities. People also talk about sorrel, sweet potatoes, different, depending on people's lineages, they'll talk about different herbs and different kinds of fruits, also depending on the region where they are. But also a lot of people just talk about things like peppers, tomatoes, onions, squash. I did a couple of interviews where people talked a lot about succotash and basically making things with whatever was fresh and available in the garden as being the kind of culinary practice that their households were used to and that they kind of try to build upon in future generations. So that's kind of my overview, and I'll turn things over to Bonnetta to fill in any gaps.
Thank you. It's so lovely to be here this beautiful sunshiny day. I hope your weather is equally as bright as ours is here. I'm calling in from Piscataway, unceded Piscataway lands in southern Maryland. Um, I have been working with young people for many years doing intergenerational project, looking at STEM issues. And one of the things that we found in our work was that it was really important to have generations talking to each other. And so we began to look at the power of the family unit, the need, the way that the universe has designed it so that the elders many times have the knowledge, but the youngins have the strong backs. And if we put that whole family together, they can accomplish so much and have historically worked together. Um, during the COVID epidemic, it became quite obvious to the community I was working with, mostly middle high school and college age youth, that we were losing senior citizens. They were dropping like flies. People were passing away, and with them, with the knowledge and the histories and the stories that could not be replaced. And so during that time, we had already begun to form a farming cooperative. And basically, what happened was that these young kids had started a business. They started a business where they sold seeds, fruit, nuts, and berries, where they sold starts for people's gardens. And just as they got ready to launch their business, COVID came, kind of shut them down temporarily. But what they found is that many of them were interested in STEM careers, and there were scholarship opportunities in agriculture for just about every scientific career. So just naturally, we moved toward agriculture, beginning to take advantage of our local USDA facilities and research institutions in this area. So it came to be that we knew that we had to try to capture these stories. And so we asked all our friends to get the eldest person that they knew and invite them into that grandmother circle that Hanna talked about. So we began having these Saturday afternoon Zoom conversations where people brought their oldest relative to talk about what was in their garden, what was on their farm, what they ate, what they used for treatment, for medicinals, what crops were important, what did you put on a wound? If you fell down and skinned your knee, what did they put on it? If you had a sore throat or a stomach ache, what was on the stove cooking for dinner? So we began to do these stories and across the African diaspora, and what we found was amazing stories of resilience, powerful stories from people who maybe would have never been recognized otherwise. Uh, Many of the elders told us that their children had never asked them these stories. And so we began to realize that we had stumbled across a treasure trove of knowledge, information, and inspiration. And so, luckily, with our dear friends from Princeton, Hannah and Dr. Tessa Desmond, we were able to put this project together and codify the work that we were doing with the vision of capturing these stories for future generations. So that's kind of how the project began. I think it was very exciting. I'm a retired high school history teacher. Oral histories is part of what we do as a part of my work. And oral histories take an informal way as we have ninth and 10th graders talking to their elders. You know, there's an informality about it. But when we got the major research institutions such as Princeton involved, it required another level of formality. There's also, I'm going to talk about the issues of distrust. So there was tremendous distrust, there still is. Um, you know, um, so we were so proud to do this work, so happy to have partners that came with resources. And that's what the bounty has been from this project. It's the ability to capture these stories, but it took technology, it took information, and also took some professional, experts in their topics to do this work. One of the greatest fears is that throughout history, small communities, indigenous communities, poor communities have been robbed of resources, and we were challenged from the beginning to make sure that we would not do that, that we would be fair in the way in which we treated the narrators, the subjects, that they would have a voice, they would have control, and that we had to make sure that those resources could be put in a place where future generations, children, grandchildren down the line could access those stories. And so, in many conversations we have, one of our partners is the National Museum of African American History and Culture. We've had this conversation across many sectors, but the idea is that these stories belong to the people, but they're hopefully going to be seen as a resource. So, also Hannah mentioned the things that we learned from these stories. So, some of the things that we learned were stories of oppression, but we learned also stories about some really yummy, delicious food and how to make that, what to grow, and what was culturally meaningful. Culturally meaningful is a very important term for Ujamaa. It's our reason for being is to teach and to reclaim the culture around culturally meaningful foodways. And so this project allowed us to codify that information and mine that. And if you would visit Ujamaa Seeds, which is our seed company, you'll see the reflection of what we learned from the elders is in our collections of heirloom seeds that we offer to the public. We do continue to give away free seeds. We run an online seed bank. We work with all kinds of organizations, and this is our 6th year doing free seed work. We've been able to support over 400 seed hubs now nationally and now internationally to help people begin to at least get those seeds back to the communities who in many cases have lost all knowledge of those things. And I think that's why collard kind of rang a bell. So across these conversations, there were some consistencies, and collard greens and the story of collard greens has risen to the top of the pot. So you know when and how you prepare those greens, what goes in the pot has a lot to do with who your ancestors were, where they lived, and what they had access to. We also know that there's some delicious medicinals there, such as the pot liquor. Pot liquor, I hope some of you know what that is, but that's the juice that's left over in the bottom of the pot that after you cook those greens were a major part of the diets of people in the Southeast. My family is from North and South Carolina, and we found that those recipes traveled. They traveled well. We heard about those in Wisconsin. We heard about them in California. And of course, they went to Boston and Massachusetts. My family went to Pittsfield and Springfield when they left South Carolina during the period of the Great Migration around World War One. But those recipes, those stories, and the goodness and the joy that came around the dinner table has been a sanctuary for important stories and traditions. And now, in the time where we are, where people are fearful about their food supply, we're being able to harvest once again the knowledge, the technologies around regenerative agriculture, the stories about what to plant and when to plant it. And all this information is being called on us on a daily basis. I get calls every day with people who want to grow their own food and who, for the first time in a long time, believe that their jobs are insecure and they want to make sure that they can take care of their families. You know, we also hope to encourage this work for mothers. Mothers, at one point, were completely responsible for feeding their families, and some of that has been lost. So, how do you know? How do you know what went in that pot? And it's through the acquisition, but also through the reclaiming and the capturing of these stories that we find delicious, wonderful things, stories that make you laugh, that make you cry, but it's the truth and it deserves honor and respect and a place within the academy, I believe, and everywhere else.
I think we can open things up for questions at this point.
So while
All
we're
right.
opening up for questions, let me tell you a story because that's what this work does. It inspires stories. And so this is a story that I've never told Hanna, and she knows a lot about my history. And it goes to the fear that many people in the African American community and indigenous communities have around universities. So the story has it that my mother and her brother, they were 11 months apart, were walking to school one day in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And they were crossing the campus of University of North Carolina, crossing the medical school, which was a shortcut to get from their community where they lived to their elementary school. And as they crossed the campus, there were some medical students that came out of the building and grabbed my mother and began to take her away. And so my uncle, who was her 7-year-old brother, was holding her hand very tightly, but there was an effort to pull her away. And so the story has it that it was very common that African Americans were used in medical research. I'm sure you've heard stories of this happening at Johns Hopkins, which is in Maryland. Other universities had a practice of using African American bodies for medical research. It turned out that one of the medical students yelled out of the window, "No, we don't need her. She's too small." And my mother was released and allowed to travel on her way to school. So that story can probably be echoed or similar kinds of stories. And the fear will be transferred to future generations. You know, I tell that story to my children because even though I work so beautifully, probably better than many people with institutions, there's always the fear and always the remembrance. And we hope that this workshop and this opportunity here is a way for us to do some healing and to build trust across institutions and across communities. But one of the ways, in my estimation, to do that is to not bury the stories, but tell the stories, own up to the past, and find ways of healing and understanding across our various communities. So, any questions?
Thank you so much for sharing all of your stories today, and what a powerful message for us and our community as well. So, questions to run around.
Hi, thank you so much for being with us today. My question is about the importance or lack of importance of place. I'm curious how you found that in your work. Like, did you speak with people who maybe had just moved to the area from far away or a different country? How important was place when it comes to agriculture and stories and our history and seeds and everything? Or maybe not important. I guess that's what I'm curious about.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at answering it from my perspective, which is that place matters deeply on multiple registers. So for many people, it was the stories are about how their families first got access to land and how they struggled to have that land, and fight to keep it in their families and be able to continue to cultivate on the land. You know, so those are stories of being in place for a long time, but then also how, because of kind of ideas about what people need to do with their lives, fears that future generations would not continue stewarding the land. But we also had a lot of people who either moved from diaspora, so people coming from Jamaica, Guyana, and wanted to be able to cultivate the foods that they resonate with culturally, but maybe don't live in the best climate to cultivate. So them thinking about how they can work towards being able to cultivate varieties that will grow in the regions where they live, so that they can grow what works in the region, but also what's culturally meaningful. And then we have people who really move all over. Like I'm thinking of Roxanne Masters, who her family seems like they've lived in every corner of the United States, really just they're looking for good farmland, and they're looking for a good community of people to exchange with. So they do a lot of kind of like in-kind bargaining and sharing of the products that they cultivate or make. And so they're looking for places where they can be kind of involved in that type of relationship with the community. But yes, place matters deeply.
Yeah, I like to address that question in two ways. I'd like to talk about our interns because our interns were from across the globe. And one of the things that behooved us to do is to make them feel comfortable with a bunch of old Black folks. You know, there was the intergenerational things, but what we observed before too long is that there were traditions around food and there was traditions around elders that people could get behind. One of the sadder things we observed this was the loss of family stories, the loss of knowledge, particularly in the African American community. That when people migrated north or west, that many of the stories and the knowledge about growing and even the respect for farming and the importance of the work was lost. It was lost in transition. This was heartbreaking for many people. So it was important for people to understand that that's exactly what we're attempting to do, is to regain this knowledge. And just because one family doesn't know everything doesn't mean they can't learn, that they can't access it. And by teaching people the skills of oral history, it's a way for people to go and just start asking all the old folks in your family, what did they know? What did they do? And so we found, so I was thinking particularly of one student we had from Korea that went deep. I mean, she was only just a sophomore in college, but she began to see the issues of social justice, became involved and entrenched in those communities, and um, and just found a love for the food and the ability to make the connections between her traditions and the traditions that she found in the Deep South. I think that's super important to understand that there's a healing that can take place in the process of doing this work. It could be helping people to see that, we're all human beings. We have similar desires, similar needs for survival. And all of us, with the exception of indigenous people, have migrated from somewhere, and many of them have migrated across the country, some with forced migration, some to find a better job, like the Lumbee from Eastern North Carolina, who migrated to the city of Baltimore for work, but carried that delicious collard green sandwich with them. They still have some yummy stuff that still managed to make the trek. So this by doing this work, it makes that information available, but it also gives inspiration and hope, particularly to the elders who were interviewed, that their lives matter and their stories matter, even though they may not be in the place of their childhood. It was still in their hearts and memories. And so place, of course, in our jet age that we live in, those places change, but there can be a sense of place, even if you're not in the place in which you were born. I like to say one more thing about those crops. One of the things that this work helped us establish was that crops are extremely resistance. I mean, strong. They're able to resilient. They're able to grow almost everywhere. So we found that things from the tropics, people don't realize that sweet potatoes are a tropical perennial crop, are doing fine in northern states. That people are surprised that teff, which is an Ethiopian crop, grows well across the U.S., as well as Scotch bonnets and callaloo and all the things that are culturally meaningful. Ewedu, which is a Nigerian crop, can grow well in multiple climates. And so a big part of the work that Ujamaa does is by developing methodologies for growing those in temperate climates, season extensions. And we found there's one of our growers in Atlanta, we found out this guy is growing delicious African fruit in the US and is looking for ways to enhance and extend the number of traditional fruit. You may have heard of soursop or wanabana, which is grown in all the tropics and is extremely beneficial in terms of cancer treatment. So all of these technologies, I mentioned the word yummy and good tasting a lot, but there's also the medicinal benefits and curative factors in a lot of traditional food, and eating a well-balanced traditional diet that's low in animal protein and high in vegetable protein other people have figured out how to have really delicious diets without eating, 5 pounds of meat a day. They can do it. So we learn and we share, and so place is being redefined um, through the Oral History Project, I think, to some degree.
Thank you for your answer. We have a question from some of our online viewers in the chat. The speakers mentioned the importance of professional expertise. Can you please list or talk about what skills or expertise were crucial for the project?
Sure, I can talk about that. But I want to start with a caveat that like you don't need professional expertise to just have conversations with elders. So anybody can go out and talk to their grandmothers and their kin about all of these kinds of things. But you do need a little bit of professional expertise to formalize a project like this into an archive. And part of that is because most archives in the United States will require that you've complied with professional ethics, that you've gotten releases from the participants, and that you've gone through an ethical protocol to kind of explain to every participant exactly what is going to happen with their stories. And so we needed to be able to develop those things in a different way from what is typically done within the university setting, because it's an oral history project, which does not classify it as a research project, so therefore doesn't fall under the purview of the IRB. But I have a lot of experience doing ethnographic research, so I'm very well practiced at creating protocols and, making sure that the protocols comply with standards. So that was the kind of professional expertise that was important from the standpoint of the university, which provided the funding for the project. So, it's important to sort of show all of these checks and balances to the funders. And I think the other, I suppose, skill is the ability to use the equipment, which is, I think it's very intuitive. And it's intimidating. It looks like it's very fancy. It looks a little scary, but like really all you have to do is make sure you push the record button and make sure you push stop when you're done. But we had to sort of train people in how to make sure that, the equipment is properly charged, that you have backup batteries, that you will upload it directly to our Google Drive, and you will upload it to a backup hard drive. And so we have we've made different like step-by-step processes for how to do all of these things.
Yeah, and I'm thinking that that there's various methods in taking oral histories, and we incorporated two almost, opposing ways of taking oral histories. We had a professor from Spelman who was an expert, one of the top experts in taking oral histories, who had one method. And then we had my country bumpkin method, which is getting people, relaxed and everything, trusting. So we did have a boot camp that we ran, and we will continue to do something of that nature to make people feel comfortable and to do some practice before. So I was with the young interns for for over a period of time. I multiple times with them. I travel with them, and sometimes it was helpful for. There's a sales talk called First Gear. Like, how do you get people loose enough to talk to you? So some strategies to use to get people who are not accustomed to being approached, that their stories have not historically been respected. They haven't, in generally, been taken since during the the WWW back during the period after Roosevelt sent the Corps out to take slave narratives. It's been a while since there's been a really national movement toward capturing these stories. And those slave narratives are so useful, so helpful. I still use them. But, this is the work we're doing. And I wouldn't say that it's without strategy, but I do want everybody to believe that no holiday or weekend with Granny is a bad time to take an oral history. If you got a phone, you've got a tool. Get busy because these stories aren't always available. One of the great minds of the Chesapeake, Vince Claggett, who was responsible for elevating African American farming in the state of Maryland and told the stories of Blacks in the Chesapeake. He wrote that book. I went to sleep a few weeks ago and didn't wake up. And gone with Vince are the stories of his life and achievements. People are trying to pick up and continue his work, but he has gone on to another manifestation. So there is a time sensitivity to getting these things recorded, even if not the most perfect form, at least in some form.
Thank you so much for your presentation and this incredible work. Clearly, the histories themselves are immensely valuable. I'm wondering if you all have, captured in some way systematically the impacts that your process has had on the participants of the folks you're interviewing, as well as the students, the interviewers, because just from what you were sharing, Bonnetta, that, the sharing stories could be healing and that students were having these transformative experiences as well. I'm wondering if you all, documented in some way how the process has affected folks participating in the project, because it seems like there could be a lot there.
Yeah, definitely on the student side, because they're part of a formalized internship program, they have like weekly reflections that they write and then a sort of final summary of how the project has impacted them. So we do have that as an archive in and of itself. And then we had a Spelman student who created her own archive of the process, which is really interesting. We haven't done anything with that yet, but we are like sort of keeping that documentation, and eventually we'll be able to do something with it. But I would say on the narrator side, we've been a little bit less systematic about thinking about the broad impacts of this work on the communities. But just anecdotally, individuals have told us that we have really shifted how they thought of themselves, like that they never thought of themselves as an expert or as doing anything valuable. And now after doing the interview, they feel that they have important things to say, and they're going to sort of change how they interact with their communities. Other things like we worked in a town called Farmville, North Carolina, and the work there has kind of inspired them, mostly through their public library, to do different kinds of gatherings and bringing people together, really across race and across political spectrum, to think about farming and gardening and sort of think about a topic that matters to people across these divides, which I think is really impactful. And that one, we might end up writing something about what has been happening in Farmville with the project. But yeah, we haven't been very systematic of looking at this across all the narrators.
But the kids they have written a book. So some of our interns have written a children's book called What is Your Seed Story? So 7 of our Princeton interns, 6 or 7, have a book that's about to hit the shelves now. They've already come up with a format. They plan to write another book with another cohort of of interns. So the whole idea is that they felt it was important enough to write a children's book to make these stories about their amazingly diverse experiences available. I mean, they got the point, let's face it. And I think there's another kind of side effect. One of our students from Princeton also went on to travel to the Philippines and has done a whole film about seed keepers and seed stories. That is now it's on our YouTube channel that talks about what the present situation is for seed keepers in the Philippines. So as we begin to see these projects that are after effects develop, it's exciting. Some people have come to us with some ideas about maybe doing a film. One of the candidates has a story about John Wilkes Booth, believe it or not, and his escape route and all the drama around the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. So there's a lot of juicy stuff that can come of it, and we believe that we have just begun.
We look forward to seeing what else will come up. One other question from the chat is, culturally meaningful foodways have a spiritual along with nutritional aspect. How are African American churches, which in many places own land, host community gardens and farmers markets, and share community meals and healthy eating guidance, involved in your projects?
You want to take that, Hannah?
I mean, I think we are not formally attached to any churches that I know of. Because we're attached to a lot of different community organizations, some of which may like consider themselves to be a religious organization. But obviously in the narratives, almost everyone relates to a church or house of worship that they are connected to at some point. Yeah, and people talk about things like, you know, sharing meals through church events or memories of church events from the past. I think we have tried to partner with organizations that care about farming and seed saving. And so that has made us not necessarily look to churches as our partners. But if it were something that a community member really wanted us to do, I think we would be open to that discussion.
Yeah, we're working with a lot of community-based organizations. Alpha Kappa Alpha has done some work with us. We work with the HBCU clubs in Washington, D.C. And there is an organization under Dr. Reverend Heber Brown of about 250 churches that have started on an effort to feed their populations. There is a huge movement to bring the church back into the food business. When I was a kid, the best meal you got in a week was probably on Sunday afternoon after church. So there's many churches also have commercial kitchens in which they can provide food their communities. We've heard from a local government official who's also a minister that they want to start doing these meals again in their church. I think the movement is going. We just want to make sure that they don't miss these stories. They don't let somebody go to sleep without giving their story. And we want them to be involved in all aspects of this work. We feel that oral histories are as important as a delicious plate of black eyed peas and cornbread, you know. There's another interesting portion of this work. I think it has to do with music and the role that music plays in the carrying on of this story. So, we put together a collection of songs that come to us. And I think that people are now writing music. We're beginning to hear that this work is inspiring other things. Jill Scott has a song called "It's Love." It's about 6 minutes long. Go into the second minutes and you'll hear her talk about cornbread and black eyed peas and all these things that I'm surprised at how many urban dwellers have never tasted black eyed peas. You know, they maybe had cornbread, but not homemade. You know, so we think that this work is a part of a greater movement of reclaiming and the movement back to the land, back to the farm, uh, regenerative agriculture. There's also raw foods and whole foods and a veganist movement that is kind of piggybacking on the stories that we're telling as well. So we're part of something that is much bigger than us, but we're doing our little role. That's all we can do is our little part.
So thank you for sharing this project. Does the change in US social and political life under the new administration in DC alter your work? Seems like it makes much of this all the more urgent, but also challenging in new ways.
It does. Many of our partnering organizations have been lost their funding up to 60 or 70%. I was in a meeting just prior to this where we're talking about doing emergency fundraising for farmers who are in trouble. It calls for a greater need for people to own their own land because you just never know what's going to happen. And the federal government, who had in the past been okay resource for Black communities, are no longer uh, a friend. You know, with the wiping away of Black history in so many places. But we'll be at it, you know. Who's gonna check Granny? That's what I like to say. You know, we're gonna do this thing, and we're not easily deterred. As a matter of fact, it probably makes us mad, which gives us a little bit more energy to do a little bit more. Brings out the fight in us. So we will fight through, and we have no intention of not taking care of our families and doing this work. So we're up for the challenge.
Yeah, and speaking kind of from the university side and thinking about funding for something like this, I mean, right now, my university has said that there will be cuts and they are not sure where the cuts will go and, you know, which programs will stay. But this feels to me like the kind of thing that would be cut. So funding to do an oral history project on Black and Indigenous farmers might not make the priority, and as times get tough, even in a place like Princeton, which is sitting on billions of dollars in endowment. So it definitely feels like there's the potential that something like this could not be supported anymore. But up until now, everything that I've been told is to just keep going, keep using the money that's been dispersed and continue on. I'm gonna put the link to the archive in the chat because I do think what's important now from the university side is that there's evidence that people are actually accessing this and that people care about these stories and cite the narratives in various kinds of work so that places like the Atlanta University Center can continue to have an archival project, because that's another thing that even if it's not directly federally funded, we all know the way that overhead funding works is that it trickles down into these other programs like having an oral historian in your library. So yes, we don't know what the future will hold, but we're going to keep going until we can.
Please check out the stories and see what you think. You know.
Thank you so much for sharing your stories today. I feel like there are a lot of trends, especially in the food space, like food is medicine and seasonal eating. I'm sure there are tons more that aren't attributed to Indigenous communities very often. I'm wondering like how these show up in your work and if people feel comfortable sharing these stories, if they think they'll be abused, or if it's empowering to talk about these things, and then how that's disseminated to the other people working in these spaces.
Do you want to start,
Well,
Nita?
yeah, I think that food is medicine has become the driving force behind many of our initiatives. We're looking at, for instance, food forests because they present a ways to increase healthy fruit, nuts, and berries, particularly the fats that come from those things, into the diet. So we are working with the Global Food is Medicine organization. As a matter of fact, I think I'm speaking at their conference. We are writing grants, and we have a huge working group looking at this both locally and internationally. No, if you can't afford a big old bottle of pills, maybe you can use some calamus root underneath your tongue, which is an indigenous treatment for a sore stomach. So, oh, it's big. It's big, and it's really particularly important to the indigenous communities, both in American indigenous and African and other indigenous communities, to capture that knowledge. It's crucial. In hard times, that's when you fall back on these things.
I'll also add that most of the people who all of the people who participated in this project want their stories to be out there and available to the public and to share the knowledge that they have with everyone. We made it very clear to them that this archive is publicly accessible. It can be used by anyone with the internet. So anyone can listen to their stories. And there were some people who did not want to participate. And often the reason people didn't want to participate is that they have fear that whether it's individuals or corporations, their knowledge and practices will be co-opted, stolen, turned into patented seeds that the people no longer have access to. So there is still, because of the historical precedent of stealing knowledge and actual items from these communities, resources from these communities, there's still an ongoing fear that that's what will happen. And as the organizers of this project, I'm not able to say that that couldn't happen, right? So I can make no guarantees that these stories would not be used in some nefarious way. But people go forth with the belief that overall in the world, sharing their stories will do more good than harm.
Great. Thank you so much for that, for everything today. Thank you for accepting our invitation and the generosity with your time. We could talk to you for a very long time, I feel like, because I've had to turn away questions because we're out of time. But maybe, Chris, you could follow up and share the link to the archive with the Friedman community. Certainly encourage community members here at Friedman to go to the archive, to also go to the project website, which is amazing as well, I can attest to. And otherwise, thank you both so much for everything that you've shared with us today. This was really wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Goodbye.